The father turned in the son. The son, according to authorities, is the leading suspect in the assassination of conservative activist Charlie Kirk. That means the father handed his son over to authorities, knowing at best he would likely spend the rest of his life in prison or face, as President Trump called for today, the death penalty. And however you parse family relations or pursuits of justice, that is a heavy, heavy decision. Many details emerged today about the suspect, and we will get to them with our best reporters as well as our security and legal analysts. And we will talk to Robert Draper of the New York Times, who wrote the definitive profile of Charlie Kirk and came to know this complex and still evolving force in American politics very well. Utah's Republican Governor Spencer Cox announced the news of the arrest of the suspect this morning, confessing that since Kirk's death, he had been racked with anger and sadness. Cox was asked if Kirk's assassination in front of some 3,000 spectators in an amphitheater at Utah Valley University was a watershed moment in America.
The question is, what kind of watershed? And that chapter remains to be written. Is this the end of a dark chapter in our history or the beginning of a darker chapter in our history? Look, I mean, if you look at true political assassinations in this country of someone of this stature, this feels a lot like the late 60s, and having one so gruesomely displayed on camera in all of our hands and in all of our pockets. We are not wired as human beings biologically, historically. We have not evolved in a way that we are capable of processing those types of violent imagery. Social media is a cancer on our society right now. And I would encourage people to log off, turn off, touch grass, hug a family member, go out and do good in your community. This is our moment. Do we escalate or do we find an off-ramp? And again, it's a choice. It's a choice. And every one of us gets to make that choice.
In the natural world, a watershed is a collection point of rain and snow from higher elevations. In the metaphorical world, it is a dividing line. I sometimes turn to poets in times of trouble, and this week certainly qualified. The first poet ever to treat watershed as a metaphor was Henry Wadsworth Longfellow in 1878. The poem, The Two Rivers, it reads in part, "Midnight, the outpost of advancing day, the frontier town and citadel of night, the watershed of time from which the streams of yesterday and tomorrow take their way, one to the land of promise and of light, one to the land of darkness and of dreams." Cox spoke of the promise of light. A father confronted the land of darkness and nightmare and turned his son in. And we confront, as Cox suggested, the watershed before us. To the details of what we learned today about the suspect, we turn to Carter Evans, who joins us from Orem, Utah. Carter?
Major, we've got some information from two law enforcement sources about how this all went down last night. We are told that Tyler Robinson's father saw his photo and confronted his son about it, and his son admitted that it was him in the photo. Now, apparently, Tyler's father told him that he should turn himself in. And Tyler responded by saying that he would rather take his own life. Now, at that point, Tyler's father apparently called a youth pastor who was very familiar with him. The both of them were able to talk to Tyler Robinson, calm him down. The youth pastor, who is also a court officer, by the way, called the U.S. Marshal's office. They came and detained Tyler until the FBI could take him into custody.
Carter, there is tremendous interest and curiosity about Tyler Robinson and what, if any, political axes he had to grind. Do we know anything about that?
So one thing that the governor said today, when authorities interviewed his family, they mentioned that he had become much more politically active lately. And they mentioned a recent family dinner where he mentioned that Charlie Kirk was going to be speaking here, and he talked about how much he hated Charlie Kirk, and that took the family by surprise. Now, I asked the governor if he was cooperating, if he was talking with authorities, and he said he wouldn't release that information. I also asked if he talked about a motive, a specific motive, and he said he can't release that right now.
There was also a conversation at the press conference this morning, Carter, about bullet casings. What, if anything, did that suggest or reveal?
Yeah, so this is interesting, and we've got an image we're going to put up on the screen now to show you what was written on the bullet casings. The first one says there, "Hey, fascist, catch." So it is believed that these represent some of his political leanings, but authorities would not go into details about exactly what was meant by the inscriptions on these shell casings or if Robinson had explained it to them.
With all of our comprehensive reporting from the scene, Carter Evans, I'm deeply indebted. Thank you. Weijia Jiang joins me now from New York, where she's been traveling with the president. Weijia, I want to play for you sound that you're familiar with, and my audience might be as well, but it's important to memorialize the president this morning, not only saying what happened, but what he hopes will happen in the future, at least judicially. Let's listen.
I think with a high degree of certainty, we have him in custody, right? In custody. Everyone did a great job. We worked with the local police, the governor. Everybody did a great job. I hope he's going to be found guilty, I would imagine, and I hope he gets the death penalty.
Weijia, were others in the White House aware of this? Obvious that the president was going to go on, but talk this specifically and this prospectively about how the scales of justice might actually render a judgment on this case?
Major, watching that interview live, it was apparent that the president himself wasn't sure how much information he was going to disclose when he sat down on that set. And that is because he said he didn't find out any of these details until about 5 minutes before that interview started. After the interview started, he actually started talking about the baseball game, the New York Yankees baseball game that he attended last night here in the Bronx, before the conversation shifted to Charlie Kirk. And the president initially said, I'm not going to reveal too many details. He said, I don't want to get sued, acknowledged that the investigation was ongoing. But as he kept talking, he continued to reveal more and more information. And so not only did he say that he had a high degree of certainty that somebody was in custody, he continued to lay out how it unfolded, including some of those details we just heard from Carter. So the president disclosed that it was someone close to the shooter who alerted authorities, and that ultimately it was the suspect's father who convinced him to turn himself into police, Major. And again, remember, this is the first time that we had heard anything about a suspect being in custody. And it wasn't from investigators or the FBI or the governor of Utah, who was leading the press remarks, but it was from the president, who, as we have been reporting, Major, obviously also has a personal stake in this because he was so close to Charlie Kirk.
Weijia Jiang in New York, thank you very much. I want to bring in CBS News national security contributor Sam Vinograd and former Deputy Assistant Attorney General Tom Dupree. Tom, I also want to play for you sound from the FBI Director, Kash Patel, from this morning. Ladies and gentlemen, let's listen to that.
We delivered, and I'm proud to be their leader, and I'm proud to be the director of the FBI. To my friend Charlie Kirk, rest now, brother. We have the watch, and I'll see you in Valhalla.
Tom, I want to ask you about these two things. One the president said and one Kash Patel said, because it suggests a personalization, which in my experience, and I covered cops, police, law enforcement when I was a young journalist, even in a community where members of law enforcement or prosecutors knew a victim, they tried to depersonalize it, to suggest to the community, we are going to handle this based on the facts, and we are not personally motivated or involved in this case. Is that what you heard?
This is obviously a horrific incident that affected the president and the FBI director, and I think a lot of people in the administration in very deep and profound ways. And so, you know, on one hand, I think it's very understandable that they react in those personal terms. But to your point, look, I mean, you're right that it is not the traditional approach in law enforcement. Traditionally in law enforcement, if you have even, you know, a fellow police officer who's slain in the line of duty.
I covered cases like that.
Right. You typically would disassociate.
And the reason they would say that is because we want to preserve the best possible prosecutorial arc for this case. So there's no point at which someone could say there's something that's been altered because of a personal motive.
Right. And look, I think, I mean, as we've seen from kind of the moment the administration came in, is they don't always follow the traditional paths of law enforcement. You know, we've seen this in the Justice Department. We've seen this in the FBI. And I think what we saw here today and we've seen in the last few days is just the fact that this was such a personal event for these people, for the president, for the FBI director, and for others, that they are, you know, not following what people would say is kind of, you know, the traditional playbook in a horrible situation like this.
And Samantha, what happened on this case was not only the typical investigative mechanisms that you and I have talked about for the last 2 nights on this program, but the public being a vital resource, seeing, hearing, and then acting of their own volition.
Certainly, and despite advanced technology, despite advanced investigatory tactics, the public and publicizing images of this individual did turn out to be a game changer. And the public played a critical role in this individual being recognized by his family and then ultimately being turned into law enforcement. That doesn't in any way degrade all the other investigatory work that was underway, but it was certainly a key factor.
Did it surprise you that the suspect, now in custody, was still in the state of Utah, had fled some distance, but not a considerable distance, and was still in the presence of people who would clearly recognize him?
Major, every horrific violent event has a different profile. We have seen so many, unfortunately, mass shootings. We've seen so many politically motivated attacks. We don't yet know the motive in this case. One thing I do want to note is that in today's threat environment, and Tom is likely familiar with this too, it's different. We historically used to see offenders that were motivated by one ideology. In today's threat environment, we are actually seeing individuals radicalize and mobilize violence based upon multiple, sometimes competing ideologies. So when we look at the pattern of an offender, no 2 cases are the same. And in this moment, what we need to do is let the process play out. And also, once this individual is brought to justice, take a step back and try to consider how this could have been prevented in the first place.
Tom, please jump in on any of those points.
Yeah, I completely agree with Sam. I think that there's a tendency a lot of times, I think it's just a human nature, that you want to fit motives into kind of a box, a preconceived box, to say that this person had a very pure political motive that conforms to whatever ideology we think, when in fact, to Sam's point, it's much more complex than that a lot of times. People act for a variety of motives. You often can have, I don't know in this case or not, but you often have mental illness playing a role. So there can be just a variety of different factors that motivate someone to commit and act what, in my judgment, was just of pure evil and malice yesterday.
Does motive, is that a requirement for prosecutors to bring a successful case in this matter?
Well, yes, but I think in this case, they're not going to have a problem proving that this was clearly an intentional, premeditated act of violence. I mean, who knows what the defense lawyers will argue? Will they try to argue that he was insane or crazy? Maybe they will. Maybe they have no better argument than that. But at least based on what we have seen, the circumstances, the precision with which this evil person acted, it seems like it would be tough to argue that he was crazy when he did something that just seems to have been so carefully premeditated and just downright evil.
And that's a critical point. This individual and most offenders of this kind don't radicalize spontaneously. They radicalize and mobilize over a period of time. And as investigators piece through how Charlie Kirk was assassinated, they will be talking to his friends and family. They will be reviewing his social media platforms. They will try to review encrypted platforms to try to see if he told anyone what he was planning to do. The indicators of radicalization and mobilization were present because, again, the point is to try to learn from this horrific tragedy, try to educate the public on what to look out for so that we prevent it from happening.
Some of the video released was after the shooting and the methodical, calm way that this suspected assailant came down from the roof and walked away. Did that tell you or suggest anything to you, Sam?
It certainly told me that he had canvassed the scene. He knew what he was doing. He didn't just go up there and look around and say, what do I do now? He clearly had a plan. He reportedly had a change of clothes. He knew how to get down. He calmly left the scene. He wasn't frantic. That does show a level of planning and premeditation.
Right. I think it's going to undermine any attempt by the defense to argue insanity, and obviously it's going to undermine any attempt by the defense to portray this as some sort of crime of passion, which is what in murder cases you often do. But this clearly, indisputably was a carefully premeditated act of violence.
And a horrible one at that. Tom Dupree, Sam Vinograd, thank you very much. I appreciate it.